はい、それではお時間となりましたので、本日最後の講演、キーノートを始めさせていただきます。ゲストはですね、Devopsdays の創設者でありますパトリック・デバーさん、またインタビュースタッフとして、アレックス・パパディモリスが参加させていただきます。お二人ともどうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
Thank you very much. And welcome, Patrick. It is great to see you. This is the first interview style that I've done like this, with sort of you there on the screen and everybody else remote as well. But thank you so much for coming. I think almost everybody here knows who you are, but can you give a sort of self-introduction?
Sure, Alex, and thank you for having me. I really like to be here in the community of Devops Days. About 11 years ago, in 2009, I started by accident the Devops Days events. I'm now about 50 years old. As you can see, I have gray hair. Not from running these events, but just being longer in the industry. I live in Belgium, and I'm currently in Belgium, so it's a privilege for me to present from Belgium to you. The way how I came to DevOps was that I changed every 3-4 years, kind of my role and my domain. So I've been a tester, I've been a developer, I've been a service manager. I've been many of those roles. And every time I was in one of those roles, they think you cannot do the other one. And then by having all that experience, I really wanted to have Dev and Ops collaborate more.
So, a lot of people know you as the inventor of DevOps. Is that a fair title? You said you accidentally started DevOps. That doesn't sound like inventing it. How did you come about creating DevOps from all of these different roles that you experienced?
So there's a couple of different threads that came together. One has been that I was working with agile teams. One has been that I was looking at John Allspaw's presentation where they gave a talk at Etsy, how Dev and Ops were collaborating. And I was seeing similar things happening that was happening in the agile community, and that was happening in the system and administrating world. I always say I did not invent it. It was just a lot of different people trying to do things differently, trying to do things more humane. And I just happened to be the person who kind of labeled it. The funny story was that I was looking for a name of this conference, and because Agile System Administration Days is too hard and too long, I said, oh, let's call it DevOps Days. And I also found it a joke on being DOD, Dead on Delivery, if you kind of take all the, the parts of the letters. I did not invent anything. I kind of see myself as connecting some of the dots. And then most of all, I amplified a lot of the stories. And that made me a DevOps enthusiast. Some have also called me the DevOps godfather, and recently is becoming the DevOps father. And that is mostly because I do take credit for getting a lot of people together and making people enthusiastic about it. So in that sense, I did not invent it, but I was, a kind of a supporter from the early days, and kind of make sure we kept having new ideas and new content at these events.
So what was really interesting is you said that the word DevOps came from the name of a conference. Are you saying that you came up with the word DevOps because you needed a name for a conference?
The true story is that I actually did not think about the word DevOps. I only came up with the title of the conference, called it Devopsdays. We got the first Devopsdays got about 60 people from all over the world. We had people from Australia, from New Zealand, from England, from France, from Germany, and they all came through Twitter, through the social thing. And it was only after the 2 days, Stephen Nelson Smith wrote a blog post that was called, What is this DevOps thing anyway? So before that, I didn't even realize myself DevOps was going to be a movement, was going to be a word. But people were so enthusiastic after the first event that they wanted to organize the same events across the world. And that is how the word DevOps kind of became a meaning after the conference had happened. So before, there was even no idea that it should be an industry term.
So that explains a lot for why it's such a community-driven concept, DevOps. But you mentioned that it never really had a definition. I feel that a lot of people have tried to define DevOps over the years. You say that you didn't create a definition. It was kind of the name of a conference, but as the person who created the conference, who sort of started the movement, what does DevOps mean to you?
Yes, the definition of DevOps is an interesting story. I already mentioned I have gray hair, so that means I already lived through previous IDs like Agile and ITIL, and before there were others. And ITIL at that time had around 11 books, and people still mistaked what it meant, even if somebody wrote like 11 books and it was not clear after 11 books what it should be. And then Agile Manifesto kind of had the one pager with kind of all the explanations. And the same problem existed. People didn't understand the original meaning. It kind of got changed over time what the meaning was. And I kind of deliberately did not want to define it myself. I know a lot of people wanted to define it, but the reasons why I did not want to do that is I think once you define something on paper, people can mistake and have the dispute on what it is. And I always wanted to keep it growing for new ideas. I did not want to make this a closed definition that people could mistake for.
That has made a lot of people's jobs difficult when they have to explain what DevOps is, I think. But it's good because, as you said, it allows for evolving. Is DevOps technology? A lot of people say DevOps is this tech or that tech. Is it something you consider a technology solution like that?
So 11 years later, I think I made a definition for myself in a way that for me, DevOps is about removing the friction between silos. And all the rest I call engineering. And that means that you can use technology to overcome part of the friction, but you can also just use technology for the technology. So technology alone will not be enough to kind of solve this. But removing that friction is still there. And that, I think, is kind of the systems view of DevOps, whether the friction is between dev and ops, or maybe it is in your finance, maybe it's in your HR, maybe it is somewhere else. That removing that friction, due to the fact that we created silos, that is the most important. So when people say to me, I have done configuration management, or I have built a CI pipeline, I am now a DevOps engineer, I always ask them, so how does it help to bridge the silo? And I sometimes have this fun when I go at conferences and I go to the booths of vendors. But how does your product overcome a silo? And then they have a really hard time explaining this, how the technology will be used to actually bridge the gap. So that's why I keep coming back. If you're using the technology to build the gap, then yes, you might be doing DevOps, but it is regardless to what technology you're using. But if you're bridging the gap, then that is the focus of what I think DevOps is as such.
So you're saying DevOps really goes a lot beyond just dev, the development teams, and the operations team, and perhaps even behind technology itself. Like it's not even necessarily a friction of IT.
Correct. I did not have that idea when 11 years ago. 11 years ago, the biggest friction in companies was between the devs delivering something to the production environment. So the collaboration between the dev and the ops. If you look at DevOps as a systems view of the company, that means once you solve one bottleneck, there is another bottleneck in the same company. For example, imagine you're working well together with your dev and the ops people, and you think we have a good team. But there is a hiring policy that is really blocking you to hire good people. Maybe they do not screen on collaboration or the social skills. That means the bottleneck is now outside of your dev and ops team, but is in the hiring team. Imagine you're doing everything well in your pipeline and you're delivering really well, but you do not have a business case and you are not making money. That means maybe you are over engineering and spending too much time on your dev and ops and your CI pipeline at not looking at the real bottleneck, which is the business. So that's how I learned that even if you would have the perfect pipeline, the perfect dev and ops, it is still not a guarantee for success, because we need to collaborate also with other parts of the business.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I I have been following a lot of your writing and a lot of your, talks for many years. I remember, obviously not since the beginning, but even 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, um, it felt like you talked a little bit differently, like you had a stronger focus on technology, tools, and maybe it was the industry in some of those early conferences. Has your definition or your understanding of DevOps changed over the years?
I do not think my personal definition or my personal focus has changed, uh, but I think I have tried to be more vocal on the cultural part, more, just because I think it is the important part. And that's maybe why you see the narrative, but I do not have many. So I do have technical talks, but regarding if I explain things in the DevOps context, you will have a hard time really finding a talk from me just on the technology. I was always show you how a certain technology will overcome some of the friction. And that's kind of how I try to make this difference. It does not mean that I'm not a technical person. And I also like to dig into the technical things and how they work together. But I think it is important to distinguish both of them. And maybe coming back to DevOps Days, in a lot of conferences that I personally help with, I always want to have in the morning only social talks and not technical talks. If you look at the submission process, there would be 70 or 80% of the submissions for people talking would be about technology. But I always remained very firmly that in the morning, there should be social talks of people collaborating and showing how technology can be used to bridge the gap. And then the breakouts would be used to kind of discuss the technology.
You know, and I think that's a great way of organizing these. We worked hard in Tokyo. We restarted Devops Days in 2017. Years before that, there was a highly technical focused version of the event, and then our team restarted it because it didn't get a lot of interest on that. Here in Japan, our focus has very strongly been on the cultural aspect, because changing the culture here especially is difficult to do. One criticism that I hear from whether it's Japanese organizations or whether it's even overseas companies, they talk a lot about how, well, DevOps is just some hype. DevOps is just a buzzword. DevOps isn't really going to change anything. It's just hype. How do you feel about people who say that DevOps is a hype?
I think DevOps is not different from any other ID. That means you will have early adopters, then there will be some excitement about this ID. Then more people get attracted, and then there's going to be a lot of marketing around it, because it changes how it becomes like a way to make money, and then it opens up to an even wider audience. I've certainly seen this over the 11 years that from a small group to a whole industry to a massive industry, how it kind of progressed. I think about five years ago, everybody had DevOps on their website, on their kind of way of working, on their products. In that way, it is probably you would call this a hype. Everybody want to be on this train, not the early adopters. I don't worry about it too much, whether it's hype or not. I've taken peace with it that the IDs will remain. It makes me a little bit sad that, well, the original intent is sometimes lost. I think the industry has settled on DevOps being the automation group. And obviously, that's not what it was intended. But I take comfort in Agile has been reduced to Scrum. ITIL has been reduced to ticketing systems. So does that make it less valuable? Not. For the people who use it correctly and understand what it means, it will have very much value. I do not have any shares. I do not have a company that relies on DevOps as such. So I have taken peace with it. I know some people have said it's already dead as a term. Most vocally has been Simon Wardley from Wardley Mapping, who said DevOps is dead. I know people have tried to reduce it to the idea of no ops. Why do we need ops anymore? From my personal experience, I think that I had my own company for a while, and we were really focused. I was really interested in learning how DevOps could help the company. And after a while, we said, we're just going to use a lot of the services. We're going to use Amazon. We're not going to do our own monitoring. We're just going to use everything that's out there because they have the scale, they have the knowledge, they have the time, they have the budget to do it way better than we can do it ourselves in a little startup. Even if you give all those tasks away or you abstract kind of the technology layers, what I found out is you're still doing ops again, but at a different layer. So we used to do management of servers. Now we're managing our Kubernetes cluster. Then we're managing our AWS. Then we're managing our Salesforce. And all of these tasks will require understanding of what the product does, how it functions under pressure, what special settings we need to do. And it is just changing at what layer we're doing the operational side, but the concept of operations will not go away. You can see it already, for example, marketing has marketing ops, right? So it is not even related to per se technology. It is just a notion that will stay there forever. And that collaboration friction between people dealing with keeping the things up versus people creating kind of the features is everywhere in a company.
Yeah, we see, even in Japan, the word ops just attached to so many things. You mentioned no ops before, and DevSecOps is becoming a new word. DevTestSecOps I've been seeing. Is there a relation between all of these ops movements? Do they have formal definitions, or are they also kind of all working towards closing or bridging gaps between silos?
A lot of the terms are around more on the technology side, doing things in a different way. What is interesting, I have seen so many terms. I have seen front-end ops, I've seen design ops, now we have ML ops, AI ops. And the way that I look at them is they're all labels to convey a new way of working, a new idea, a new concept, a new problem space. So we should not look at them as being the next thing or being better than the previous thing. We should just look at them as groups of stories that we can learn from. And I think that is the value that the word DevOps has had early on, is everybody was exploring new ideas, new concepts, new collaboration ways. We got a label, so that made it very easy to get the stories to be searchable and to find the similar-minded people. And the same has happened now with DevSecOps. Enough people have got an idea how to make this better. They're experimenting with this, and now it serves as a label to kind of find those stories. Does that mean DevSecOps needs a new term? And is it different from DevOps? No, you could say the collaboration between silos is the same. We're just doing it for security now. But then again, is DevOps not the same as Agile? Yes, it is. It is funny how this grew, because before the term DevOps, I went to a lot of Agile conferences, and I tried to kind of explain the ideas. And I never somehow conveyed my message until I created a new silo, which was a new conference, which was New Devops Days, which was not an agile conference as it was known at that time.
So I think you may have just lost me for a second. You're saying that the idea of DevOps, which is to bridge silos, couldn't have existed until you created the word. That kind of sounds like a bit of a paradox to me. Is this a trend you see in our industry, this sort of paradoxical existence of words and ideas?
Oh, Alex, paradoxes are everywhere. Like one of the first paradoxes I learned in the industry is it's called the irony of automation. So the more you automate, the idea that we all think is very valuable. We think we are getting better at things, and we're getting, we can deliver faster and so on. But the flip side is when these things fail, and we've never done them manually, we never trained in them, we don't know anymore how to do it. And we don't even know anymore why we did the automation sometimes. And when it fails, that means, well, we automated, but we didn't get better at it when it failed. So we still have to train on it. Another paradox is similar to DevSecOps or security. Imagine you have a vulnerability and you kind of have a major information leak. That is the perfect time to get money for your DevSecOps projects, right? Because you have felt the pain, you know the pain, and we're going to work on this. What researchers have seen is that the more you feel secure, the less you can defend the budget of security because nobody really needs to feels the need for spending so much time on the budget of security. And maybe the last paradox that I've seen is we talk a lot about customer-centric and being focused on the customer. A lot of the SaaS companies start out that way, but after a while, that customer gets reduced to the main customer that brings in the money. And all the other customers, they don't care too much about anymore. So it's kind of this you do a lot of effort and then you get pushed back on the same ideas. And it's interesting to think about these paradoxes, how we try to get better at things.
So so the better you get at something, the less you fail, and the less you fail, you forget how to fall, you forget how to fail. How can a security, or if you have gotten really good at security, you have all the vulnerability scanning, you have all the good practices, I don't know, whatever it takes to do DevSecOps, how do you maintain a culture of, how do you not only keep your budget, how do you make sure that your team and your organization remains secure and doesn't fall into that paradox?
It's if I take the comparison from DevOps, where we started introducing things like chaos engineering or resilience engineering, it's spending time to overcome your own biases. And what you see is that the continuous integration and continuous delivery just shifts to continuous learning. And you kind of have to have this spirit that if we're doing this today, how can we get better? What can we learn? What are we not seeing? And so instead of it, you spend the time on building the things all the time, you kind of have to spend the time on the maintenance. You sometimes see this in development as well. New developers, they use a lot of external libraries and they add a lot of stuff. And more senior people, they know when to balance, when to add something, when to remove something, and when to write something themselves. So it's kind of on this learning path on what they consider important for that context, that they should keep on training and not be unprepared for when things fail.
So it sounds like these disciplines you're talking about, that a lot of the DevOps themed ones, would you say that it's important to understand, to not just have somebody come in and set up automation and just have somebody come in and set up security and then you never have to worry about it again? How important is understanding why DevOps principles exist? Has that been important in organizations in your experience?
It's interesting. The learning curve for somebody adopting new things. If you don't know anything about automation, it's really beneficial to have somebody come in that knows more about it and to have it, learn to you. But that person only has seen certain contexts, certain setups. It cannot be blindly used in your company. So you really need to understand the context. And the context is important, for example, what to do first, because we can do a million things, but for you to understand what to do first is probably you understand in the context of your own company. I see a lot of companies just blindly putting up CI pipelines and automation deployments. But I sometimes then ask them, why are you doing this? Because everybody else does this, right? And we can faster deploy. And that comes back to the same question to the silos, right? If your answer to better collaboration is to build an automation system so we don't need to talk anymore, then I don't think that's the best way to go forward. And one of the thought experiments I asked them is, imagine your CI system would fail. If your CI system is working and your engineers will be not there for a day, what will happen? All good, it's all working. What if they're not there a week? Well, will it survive? Well, maybe. What if they're not there 2 weeks? And you see a lot of people getting uneasy. By the way, these type of questions come from Joel Allspaw on resilient engineering. I did not invent them. But the main idea is that if your CI system would not be there, do the people still know what to do? And that means only then it is embedded into the people knowledge and what they need to do and why they're doing this. If they understand the why, they will still act the correct way, even without a CI pipeline. But if you didn't explain the why, then there will be lost. I learned this firsthand. I built up a pipeline with the developers and they really liked it and so on. All of a sudden, a new paradigm comes along, serverless. They could now deploy it very easily themselves. And what I saw is that they skipped everything. They skipped the version control. They skipped the testing because they could immediately go to production. And then I realized I did not explain why we are doing this, because if I had explained this way better, instead of just setting up the pipeline and forcing them to do this, then they might have thought this through, and even with serverless, use the pipeline also.
So this ends up being about, going back to what DevOps is, a lot of it is training on process, training on understanding why these tools, why these automations and collaborations help remove the friction between departments, between units, between people, as opposed to somebody set up a thing that I just have to press a button and I never have to think about what that button does. You would say that's not the right way to go about the culture change in an organization.
Correct. Otherwise, in English they call it a shell game. You're just, it's a game with 3 balls and 2 cups, and then you kind of have to juggle around it and see where the ball is. You're just shifting complexity around, and you're not solving the complexity. I've seen this, for example, I know Sam has given a talk around microservices. When microservices came along, a lot of the developers were really excited about, oh, I can really focus on this one function. It's really going to help me. And the operational people also liked it because it was a very limited kind of deploy unit for deploying microservices. The problem that happened is that developers only needed to care about a function and a one thing. But when all these microservices needed to work together, the complexity of understanding that whole system got loaded on the operational person, because the complexity was just enormous to understand what was going on now amongst all these services. Instead, when we had the mono, everything was contained into that one service. So that is just an example how we in our industry are just like shifting around complexity in a way that we're not always solving the exact problem that we're focused on.
Yeah, I really love that example, and it's something that we'll be talking about tomorrow. And hopefully, if you have time, I'd love to get you to join. Sam will be joining us, Sam Newman, for monoliths, decomposing monoliths into microservices. And the part that I love about that too is taking one big monolith that has 1,000 modules and is very complex, and bringing into 1,000 little modules that are very complex. And now, one big problem to 1,000 little problems. They're both, shifting complexity is a hard thing. Like you said, a shell game. So one thing before I get too off track, I definitely want to encourage. I've got we could talk all day, and I have 100 questions I could ask, but I'd love to hear from some of the folks here, whether online in the room with Japanese speaking. So, yeah, if anyone has questions,
川口です。川口です。質問させていただきたいです。日本語で質問させてください。よろしいでしょうか。
Yes, please.
はい、素晴らしいお話ありがとうございます。すごく、ちょっと感動しながら聞いてました。で、私、すみません、実行委員の川口と申します。よろしくお願いします。で、2年前に、10周年の Devops Days 10周年のオーガナイザーミーティングに私も、少しだけ参加させていただきまして、ベルギーのヘントに、お邪魔して、お話を聞きました。で、その時にすごく感動したのが、隣に座ってた方が、Devops Days のジュネーブ、スイスのジュネーブですね、ジュネーブのオーガナイザーの方で、最近どういう人がそのジュネーブ、スイスだと、Devops Days に来るんですかっていう話を質問したら、スイスなので、銀行が多いかな。それから病院が多いかな。あと、ジュネーブなんで時計のメーカーって言って、 僕非常に驚いたんですね。日本だと、実はソフトウェアをやっているそのシステムインテグレーターという人たちが結構いるんですけど、ソフトウェアやってる人たちがこういうイベントに割と来ることは想像できたんですけど、まあ、日本だと銀行の人、まあ、多少たまに来るかな。病院の人は見たことがないです。で、これは、ヨーロッパではもう普通の話つまり一般の IT じゃなくていろんなものが統合していて、もう病院でも IT が大事であって、で病院の多分 CEO も IT が大事だと理解をしているという状況が、まあ、そのジュネーブにはあるのかなというふうに私は感じたんですけど、これっていうのはそのパトリックさんがこの10年少し、Devops を、ベルギーで見られていて、どう変わってきたかで、というのを教えていただけますか。それから、私たち、日本はまだ変わってないと、東京は変わってないので、社内には、会社のマネジメント層、偉い人の層がいて、この人たちは基本的にあんまり IT のことがわからないので、ちゃんと説明するときに、メタファーとか、隣の会社もやってますよとかっていう説明をせざるを得ないエンジニアの人がたくさんいます。で、この人たちをどうやったらその分からない人に説明する苦労から解放してあげられるかっていうのをずっと私この3年ぐらい考えてるんですけど、いいアイデアがあれば教えてください。
And hopefully you were able to catch all that, Patrick. Did that come through okay? Oh, you might be muted on your end.
I'm really sorry, but I only
Oh.
heard the Japanese version, so.
Okay. No problem, no problem. So I will do my best to remember the English portion. But basically
パトリックさん、ごめんなさい。パトリックさんの、通訳設定が多分オフになってると思います。Patrick, could you set your Zoom menu?
Oh, Patrick, can you hear Japanese or English now?
The last sentence was in English, and before that, everything was Japanese.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Patrick's now talking, but I can't hear him. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but yeah.
Patrick さん、could you set in your Zoom menu in the translation, interpretation menu and set English?
Okay, I've switched to English now, yes.
もう一回だけちょっと通訳さんと質問しますね。
Yes, I can hear you now.
シンプルに言うと、
I apologize for not pressing the button.
ジュネーブのそのDevops Days の、ベルギーのヘントに、おととし、Devops Days の10周年の、オーガナイザーのミーティングがあって、そこに私参加させていただいたんですけど、そこで出会ったジュネーブの Devops Days の、オーガナイザーの人がいました。で、この人が言っていたのは、最近 Devops Days にジュネーブで参加するのはどんな人って聞いたら、病院の人、銀行の人、時計メーカーの人っていうふうにおっしゃってるんですね。これが私非常にびっくりしまして、で日本だとおそらくソフトウェアを作っている会社の方が割とこちらに、Devops Daysに来ることが多くて、銀行はあんまり見たことないし、病院は一度も会ったことがないと。時計メーカーの方は、多少いらっしゃいます。はい、確かに。日本も時計メーカー多いので。はい、でそれは、この10年少し、ヨーロッパで Devops Days Devops を見てこられて、ヨーロッパの中でのその変化というのは、どういうふうに企業ごとどういうふうに来たのかっていうのを教えていただきたいのが質問1つ目。もう一つの質問は、東京ではまだそういう状況になってないんですけど、ってことは、各企業の皆さん、今日来てるような皆さんの会社には、私は Devops をやろうとしてるんだけど、会社のトップ、マネジメント、それから会社のマネージャーの人たちの一部、大多数かな、マネージャーたちは Devops のことがわからないので、 彼らにちゃんと理解してもらうために、彼らは IT すらわからないので、わかるようにメタファーを使ったりとか、頑張ってこう説明をしているんですね、IT の人たちは。で、その苦労からちょっと解放してあげたいと私いつも思っていて、この3年ぐらいずっと思ってるんですけど、どうやったらその彼らをちゃんとエンジニアリングする、説明役、わからない人への説明役ではなくて、ちゃんとエンジニアリングする人に、集中させてあげるにはどうしたらいいかっていうのを、考えてるんですけど、アドバイスがあれば教えてください。
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I now understood. So if I understand it right, there's actually two questions. One is about the DevOps days having a different audience in different parts of the world. My view on it is that when people organize DevOps days, they often tap into a local community that they're already connected to. And that makes that some events are more development centric, some are more business centric, some are more engineering centric. So that means he's doing signals. Is that for me? Sorry.
Ooh, sorry.
Oh,
no,
okay. I just wanted to be zoomed. Okay, perfect. Yeah. And that leaves that the organizers actually bring most of the initial network, and that gets amplified by friends that come along and the promotion and the kind of the networks are done. So it isn't that much, I think, of the concept of DevOps days. It's more of the network that's already there and that is get tapped into. In Switzerland, they came of it from a financial institution. A lot of the original organizers of the Devops days already had that network. So that means they bring along kind of this people with FinOps and kind of banks being the predominant part. In, for example, Australia, it's more developer focused. In China, again, it is more about the technology. So again, it's the network. The second question, if I heard, was that you have a hard time explaining why DevOps is useful to management, why we should be doing this. It is a struggle that I've seen everywhere, but I've seen it change through books like the Phoenix Project, the Unicorn Project that Gene Kim has written, because it is kind of translated into a little bit of the theory of constraints with success stories of big companies also doing it. I'm not saying this is the best approach, but at least it is translated into business speak more than we are often at the practitioner level on a DevOps days. And that's where it helps. I personally also learned that if you have a hard time explaining why collaboration is a good thing, you have to start thinking if you're not discussing at the belief level. Because if somebody still believes that everything can be solved with automation and there is no need for collaboration and we can write the perfect specifications for people to implement and there is no need for collaboration, then we have a different worldview. I think that is the shift of we assume failure, we assume everything cannot be done by technology. We assume that by diversity and by collaboration, we can do better things. And that's an assumption that, again, we believe is better. And we will find you the proof that it is better. But I know people will also find the proof that you don't need it. And they will show you that by all the automation, I can get more efficiency. And why spend all the time collaborating? And in doing this. Just maybe as a final quote, Damon Edwards, who's been there from the beginning in DevOps days, and he was much talking to business people around the concept of introducing DevOps. And I remember a story about him going into a big manufacturer, and he was talking about all these efficiencies and all these improvements. And the big, the kind of CEO person just said, this looks interesting, but if I just raise the price of my product with a couple of 10 cents, I will get the same improvements. So we can also not exaggerate the improvements that we can produce. We have to stay honest. But I think for me personally, DevOps is not about the efficiency. For me, I am a community person. That's why I started Devops Days. DevOps is about having not constant arguments and having a nicer way while working and having a better life while working. And obviously, if your company is not interested in your well-being and only in the efficiency, you will have the hard problem. I believe you already had a talk on mob programming. They have the same problem. Why is it more efficient to have 7 people in a room working all day on the same problem? Well, one thing you don't know is that the knowledge is shared. We can be much faster on the handoffs, and we can solve problems together with multiple views and get better at this. The opposite people will say, this is not the most efficient way. Why is everybody working, spending their time, being idle when they need to be idle? And that is, again, it's a belief system, but I do believe this collaboration is kind of more efficient in the long run. And more has to do with the fact that you cannot predict things. We like to think in metaphors of manufacturing and kind of this automated process. But these days, software development is so complex, it's not standardized, it's changing all the time, that it is not that mechanical kind of we do A and then B happens and then C happens. A lot has to do of changing how we do things, learning from it, adapting, doing something else, trying, and working on that. And that is, as far as I know, collaboration is the best form to do that. I hope this answers your question.
That's a great answer. Yeah, thank you. And hopefully next time you can come in person and then we can talk about how to establish collaboration in Japanese organizations. It is a surprising challenge to do that. And I think you gave a great point that we can't implement DevOps inside of a company that doesn't value collaborative and collaboration approaches. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Are there any other questions that are out there? If anyone has a question, please. Actually, I don't know the technical.
質問いいですか?
Yes.
はい、やった。はい、サイボズの永田と申します。貴重な講演ありがとうございました。はい。で、私の質問は、DevOps においての、で、毎回感じる、カンファレンスで感じることなんですけれども、CD、CI/CD とか、そういう、デリバリーのところは、すごく議論になってるんですけど、そこから受ける、モニタリングとか、オブザベーションというところの議論がですね、なんか弱いような気がするんですね。あと、それから、それに対しての自動化とか、そこのところってどういうふうなことをすればいいのか。ちなみに、私のところですと、 アンケートをしてます。で、そのアンケートを分析して、どういうふうなフィードバックをお客が、で、こう、やっていこうかっていう形でモニタリングしてるんですけど、まあ、いかにもアナログですよね。この辺のところって、そこが結局ボトルネックになってしまうかもしれないなと思いまして、まあ、そこら辺の議論ってどのようになってるでしょうか。
Thank you for your question. I think from my perspective, automation has always been connected with monitoring, because monitoring is the way how you get your feedback on if you're doing well or not. So it has always had a relationship. I tend to think about automation going from the dev to production, and monitoring is from getting the feedback from production to the devs to know what to decide and what to do next. I think in a lot of the times they are discussed together with things like observability and monitoring of learning this. The CI pipeline and automation are related, but not always the same, because some things are automated outside of the CI pipeline, and the CI pipeline itself needs to be automated in several cases. I'm going to answer with a story about Microsoft. I think it was OneNote or one of their products. They really decided to do this very agile and to have a quick release and to deliver this into public. And they wanted to get the feedback. And what happened is a product that had been running for many years that they just improved, when they added the feedback button, their system that had to handle the feedback crashed over to the load. Because if you are not serious about getting the feedback and you don't build the mechanisms in, then you will not get the feedback and you will only get your own thinking. But if you really open this up and are not afraid to do this, then you will get a lot of feedback. But the difference is between I have an ear and you can shout at me, or am I willing to listen to it? There is, of course, also, if you get a lot of feedback, you have to triage and monitor and filter. So it is sometimes really scary to understand what to do first with the feedback. But I think the feedback is the only way that you can keep learning. Otherwise, you have just gone from A to B, and how do you know how to improve? I don't know if that answers your question.
はい。ありがとうございました。
You're welcome.
So we have, let's see, we're coming close to the time, but I think that we have maybe time for one more question if someone would like to jump in. Anyone out there? I can't actually see you joining us remotely, but I'm picturing that someone out there is wanting to raise their hand or unmute and join.
いいですか？
Yes.
はい、ありがとうございます。一つ質問が、最初の川口さんの質問と似てるんですが、なかなか本を読めと言ってもみんな読まないし、勉強しろと言ってもやっぱり勉強する人ばかりではない。そんな中で、なんていうか、グレースフルにDevOpsのカルチャーを広めるのがすごく難しいと感じています。何かどう一歩は踏み出せるかもしれないけど、3歩ぐらいを踏み出す時の何かポイントってありますか？
Thank you for your question. So how do I get people started when they don't want to read books or they don't want to listen? Obviously, that is really hard. When people come to me with these kind of questions and say, well, they're not interested, how can I convince them, and that this is a better way and we should do something like this. They often put the kind of the burden to the other person, saying, well, they are not learning, they are not doing this. So you have to turn to yourself, like you say, what can we ourselves do better? I can ask you a couple of questions. If they're not interested in doing this, could it be that we're not actually solving a pain that exists? Or are we not formulating a pain that they feel? Because if they don't feel that there's something that needs to be improved or that helps them, we can ask everybody. I have 3 children, and the best way to have them do something is not by saying you should do something. But once they learned that they had a problem, that I hope they will come to me and then I can give them advice. But as long as they don't have had the problem, they don't feel the problem, I did not explain the problem well to them, I can tell them everything I want, but they will not listen. So the advice in this case I would give you is that really, really talk to that person and try to listen and find out, besides DevOps, outside DevOps, don't mention even DevOps, what is the problems you are facing today? Where can I help you? DevOps is not a solution for everything. And like I say, if it's a problem they're not feeling, they don't care about, or it doesn't change, like in the example with the money, if it's only a few cents, why are we changing everything that we believe in? It does not make sense. So the burden on showing value is actually on you. And that means that either you do something, you show that you've improved something drastically, you help them, and then obviously if they don't see your work or they don't appreciate your work, you have another problem. That is not a DevOps problem. But if you see the progress, you help the person to overcome a problem they have, you will go a long way in actually kind of bridging the problem space of them being interested in your advice. There's, if you want to create trust between the two, that that person should listen to you for that advice, there's a couple of things. You can show that you're competent by doing your work really well. You can show that you are really committed to it, that you do this every time, you say the same things, you kind of are there when they need you. And then you also can show that you care. And the care is, a lot of it is about understanding how they think, how they understand things, what problems they have. And this is not going to be solved by a technology we change. And even if you change the technology, that problem will still remain. So the best advice is just to ask good questions, like, what problems do you want me to solve? If it's not this, where can I help you? Where can I help you? What value can I bring to you? And hopefully that gives you a better focus on where to spend your automation efforts, where to spend any of the work you are doing, because they will see immediate value in there. thank you for your question again. It's a very good question.
Oh, that's a wonderful question and great answer. Thank you so much, Patrick. So we are a little bit over, but I think that's okay. This has been a wonderful session. Patrick, if there's anything you'd like to leave us with, closing thoughts or something, I know that everyone has been very appreciative of you joining us in your early morning and sharing some lots of advice and information. It's been wonderful. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. If there's one thing I learned, that it's really not easy. So if you feel that you're alone, you have a hard time for this, I can totally relate. I still feel this when I go into engagements or companies. But the idea that we might change something for the good, and we did change something for the good, that is what keeps me going. And I hope this gives you also enough strength to keep going and make the effort of making this your job and others people's job more humane and kind of collaboratively in that sense. I do hope to be someday in Tokyo, and I hope you will have me at that time. And congratulations on this event again. It shows really how this whole community has come, back up again after these hard times. And good luck with the rest of the conference. And thank you, Alex, the translators, the people asking questions, the people attending. Thank you very much to making this yet another great DevOps Days today.
Thanks, Patrick. We really appreciate it and look forward to having you in Tokyo. So thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Patrick, Alex, thank you very much. はい、皆様どうもありがとうございました。これにて Devopsdays Tokyo 2021Day1 すべての講演が終了となります。皆様ご参加いただき誠にありがとうございました。ありがとうございました。明日は2日目ですね。明日10時半からオープニングセッションが始まりまして、また1日をかけていろんなトーク、ぜひ楽しんでいただければと思います。はい、それでは、初日、これにて終了でございます。それでは皆様、また明日。良い夜を。